see it.
And also.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our CSC presentation on expanding the welcome. I'll introduce our CIC committee briefly. Gretchen, over here. Judith Ritchie. Joe Dyer, Camilla Cervantes are also here, but not in presence. They're with us spiritually, I'm sure.
Lauren Lamson.
Maureen, yeah, not to be forgotten. That's, yeah. That's
And
all we
Linda
get.
Simmers.
And Linda Simmers is on our subcommittee. She helped us put all of the slides together. So we're going to start with a showing our vision. I'll just take this out. These are the objectives that. Okay. So our objectives are right here. This is what we hope to accomplish from our session today. We're going to go through a series of short exercises. And then we have our keynote speaker, Pastor Sue Schneider, who graciously joined us from Lutheran Position in Montrose. Gretchen will show us how perception can work from different vantage points. We have a cool presentation to do that. So I'll give you the microphone.
Okay. Okay, this is just a little sort of game that we're gonna play, and my assistant is going to hand out the little page. Don't turn the pages until I ask them to. Okay. I should say that the committee called Creating for Inclusion is tasked with providing an inclusive community for all. We have a task to do 4 adult forums about the LGBTQIA plus community, and this is the second one. We'll have a third one in October, but this is only one area that we are interested in. We want to work with many different areas. Okay, so you want to do the next one? Okay, what do you see here? A lot of you have seen these pictures before. What do you see?
2 faces.
2 figures. And what?
And a base.
And the base, all right. Notice you're not gonna be able to see both at the same time. Your mind has to click in on one and, you know, you feel that little switch and it clicks in on the other. Okay, I'll try the next one. What about this one? That was a new one for me, but that's the oldest one of these kind of.
Oh, I see it done.
You see that? And you see it right up there. And you can see both, but you can't see both at the same time. Next one. Let's hear it. The old lady and the young lady. The old lady with that little skinny mouth and big nose, and the young lady that's the thing around her neck. You can turn the pages in this little book and see those up close, and you can take it home with children and grandchildren. Okay, what's the next one? This was one I had never seen. What do you see? Frog, horse. Can you see the horse? That's this idea that we can't see something with our brain, we can't see 2 things with our brain, we're gonna kind of morph into the idea here that we have to also let go of perspectives in other areas before we can receive the new one. And what's the last one? A donkey. This is a test. I want to see how many of you see donkey or mule first. That says something. No. What else do you see? The seal with his flippers up there. Okay. You have to, like I said, you have to, and you notice this too, you have to kind of switch your eyes, switch your brains to move to that other image. I'm gonna ask you to switch your brains and switch your eyes as we talk further about, changing perspectives. I get the easy part, I get the part that just saying. Keep those pictures.
So I can want some.
You go. It makes some. So it's gonna be that, yes, there we go.
Okay, so just as there are different perceptions in Gretchen's exercise, so too there are different perceptions in the Bible. And Bible stories always center on the marginalized person. We're going to use one story in particular, the Samaritan woman at the well. There are study Bibles on each of the tables if you want to look it up. I think the place is just bookmarked in your stories. But this is just kind of a pattern, how those on the edges always become center of the story in gospel. So with the Samaritan woman as well, there is usually the assumption that she is a divorcee, she is a loose woman. Preachers love preaching on this. But women at the time could not get a divorce. And so it could be that her husbands had died. There are many reasons that she could have had 5 husbands. Her past is not involved. Other preachers preach on the fact that the encounter with Jesus emphasizes her sin. But there is no statement in the Bible that testifies to that. There is nothing that's said in the Bible that she's a wicked woman, that she's an evil woman. Anything at all about her character, either positively or negatively. Her role in the story, an uninformed foreigner whose life nearly turns around, or she could be the catalyst. She was the one that brought all of the people to Christ. She's the one that introduced the community and proselytized for him. So the catalyst of grace in these stories is what we're trying to show here, starting with challenging norms, going to an internal relationship, which ends up ultimately in communal power. And okay. So now let's turn the lens inward a little bit. We'll do a short exercise showing how our perceptions may be shaped. In the instructions, we are going to start a reflective activity called First Impressions. We're going to give you a few minutes to think on and write some answers to the questions on the sheet. We're not going to put anybody on the spot. If you want to share with us later, you can do that. But we'll start by answering these questions that are on the list. First question. Think about this. You can write it down on the paper. You can just internalize it. When is the first time you can remember learning that some people are lesbian, gay, bisexual, or queer? I'll give you a few moments to reflect on that. Where do most of the influence of your initial impressions, understanding of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and queer people come from? Could it have come from family, friends, television, books, news, here at the church, someplace else? Just think about that for a moment. When the first time you can remember learning that some people are transgender? Where did most of the influence of your initial impressions or understanding of transgender people come from? Take a moment with that. And And how have your impressions, understanding of queer people changed or evolved throughout your life? Sorry.
I feel that God made all of us. He should judge other people because of his.
Thank you. And the rest of you, how was it to do that activity?
Lisa. You either give her or I could repeat what she
Yeah.
said.
I give you the mic.
I feel that God created all of us. And so we shouldn't judge how he created them.
Thanks, Mary.
Yeah.
Okay. Does anyone else have any thoughts that came to them while we were doing the exercise? Anything you would like to share? Again, we won't put anybody on the spot, but if you want to say something, share it with us.
This is probably pretty obvious, but I didn't see it on the sheet. I learned almost everything I know. Special community from being a nurse and being in the health field. And I could answer every question almost based on being a nurse as a progressing through the hospital and the healthcare system.
Somebody else?
To me, the interesting thing is that for question number one, I cannot tell you when. I was a child. I was 5, 6, 7 years old. My parents had a couple of gay friends, but I don't remember is ever learning a label for them. They were just a man who liked a man, and this woman, who was a friend of my mother's, really has a girlfriend, and that's it. There was no label. And this was the 1960s, but in my home, there was no label. So to me, it was kind of normal until I moved to Spain and I went to college. And then there were labels, and the labels were not nice.
The LGBTQ group communities and so on actually never hurt anyone. And so when we look at the current political climate and we see all of this hatred, I'm not in that community, but that hatred is very, very scary because I am aware that Adolf Hitler put LGBTQ in concentration camps because of Nazi hatred. So when I see all this hatred today, it conjures up that historical factoid. And I look at the people who do all the hating and say, hey, your hatred is far, far worse than anything those folks have done who never hurt anybody. So why do you hate somebody so much who never hurt anybody?
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Let's see. So what about the fifth question? How have your perceptions changed over time? Or have they?
I have to say that I learned just the words, oh, that is so gay, in high school and college, but I didn't understand what it meant. When I first started thinking about it, I was kind of, oh, I'm so sorry. It's an aberration. I'll think about them and pray for them, and it's a sad thing that's happened to someone. But as I've learned to humanize people, all people, I celebrate someone's love for other people. And I don't care if it's a love for man or woman or, whatever. I just celebrate that they've got that capacity to love. And I think it's taken me a number of years to understand that, but I think that's where I'm at now.
Yeah, that's a wonderful attitude. Have you always had that attitude? Has it changed over time and you evolved?
It changed. I mean, through church and understanding that there are people in our church. There were friends from college, there were other friends in at work. I was able to see the humanity in people, and it, you know, I wasn't always I would love to say, oh, I've always been a really open-minded person, but I don't think I have been at some point, so.
So we're hoping that there is a natural shift in people towards love, as we've demonstrated here. Going from initial exposure, your first understanding of somebody that's different from you, somebody that has been marginalized. Your vocabulary shifts along the path. And hopefully along that process, your empathy is deepened. Which brings us to our keynote speaker. This is how we welcome people in our church, a wild and conditional welcome. Through acknowledging our lenses, reading scripture with grace, and honoring our evolution. And without further ado, I'll introduce Pastor Sue Schneider from Living Mosaic.
Thank you very much. I'm honored to be here. And I have to say, I really enjoy my homework assignments of trying to figure out what the ELCA says about gender. Because frankly, it doesn't say very much, not specifically. A lot of you have talked about relationships and love between people who are of a specific LGBTQ framework. But this today, I'm not going to talk about the interpersonal relationships so much as the individual. Who are you as a person part of it? And the ELCA has statements about how people who are of the same sex can be married and be ordained. We can perform marriages in our churches, but there's not a statement specifically about gender, which is interesting and troubling. And I thoroughly enjoyed doing the digging of what I could glean. And I will tell you that 90% of what I came up with today came from a document that was put out in 2019, a social statement called, let me get the name right, Faith, Sexism, and Justice, a Call to Action. And so this is not new. It wasn't new then, but I find it extremely helpful because it's the only one that talks about gender rather than relationships. So the first thing when I was asked to speak about what does the ELCA say about gender, my first answer was, well, really not much. But the actual answer to that question, and if you nod off or decide to leave early, this is the only part you need to hear. The actual answer to what does the ELCA say about gender is, to quote John 10, where Jesus says, I have come that they may have life and have it abundantly. That's underscoring everything. It comes up again and again and again. It may not have been its own document, but that is the pervasive attitude, I believe, in church documents from the Lutheran Church. And, you know, we don't have a pope. What the bishops write, what theologians say, that's not binding for all people. You have to believe it. But it is the ethos in which we are living. And the ethos is everybody has value. They are made by God and they are perfectly deserving, each one, of abundant life. So here's where I started my premises. There are, I would say, 4 fundamental things that underscore everything we believe about justice and gender. And these are the things that we believe all people are created by God. That's one of our fundamental beliefs as Christians. We believe that humans sin, even if we have good intentions. We believe that we are alienated by that sin from God and from each other and from all of creation. I mean, I don't think so far I've said anything too radical. The third principle I would say is that even though we sin, we are justified by God's grace. Everybody is. And that grace frees us and empowers us to do good things in the world, empowers us to love each other, empowers us to love creation, empowers us to love God. So far, so good? nothing scary. And then I would say that the last premise that I'm coming from is maybe the way I have learned about the ELCA. Is that because we are freed by God's grace, we are able to respond to that love by loving our neighbors as ourselves. And that loving our neighbors takes the form of neighbor justice. It isn't just taking over coffee cake when somebody has a baby, which is lovely, do it. But the living, breathing example of love is to make sure that your neighbors are treated justly. That's, I believe, the premise that I come from when I think about what does the ELCA teach. Loving your neighbor means making sure that they get what they need to have an abundant life. So that's where I'm coming from. And I wanted to also share with you how do we respond to these basic teachings. Again, none of this is new, but I just wanted to tell you this is how I'm coming at the question of what do we say about justice and gender. One of the responses that we make as Lutherans is to pay attention to how we read the Bible. Not news to anybody here that the Bible can be misused badly. And one of our lenses for reading the Bible is what Martin Luther called the Bible is the cradle of Christ, you know. And one of his big points was not every part of the cradle touches the baby. Some parts are more significant than other parts. And he is famous for not liking the book of James, for example. He wanted it out of the Bible. He didn't think it was relevant to the gospel. And the idea of the gospel is that you are saved and loved by God's grace. And he's like, that's straw. It doesn't get near the baby. So we are called to pay attention to the scriptures that touch the baby. And I think you can throw out a few things like whether or not you can eat shellfish and it doesn't touch the baby. So when you are reading the Bible or when people are quoting the Bible, the question is how close is that to the baby? Because if it's not close to the baby, let it go, strong. We can struggle about what touches the baby, but at least we're coming at it from that angle. But that's not the only place. Yes, we believe that scripture is authoritative and informs our convictions and our actions, but we also believe that human knowledge and reason are gifts from God. I mean, the reason we have science and the reason we have medicine and the reason we have all of these things is because we've been encouraged to develop these gifts as gifts from God. And the purpose of these gifts of knowledge and reason are to help the common good. I think that's our response. So even if this is what they taught in 1522, it may not be what is taught now. We don't use leeches all the time. We don't generally bleed people all the time because our science has advanced beyond that. Same with our theology. We can keep looking at things with the help of sociologists, with the help of people who have done more medical research, with the people who have thought more deeply about things that are relevant to our time. So I would say, yes, we have scripture as an authority, but we don't rule out ways that we've come to understand scripture differently, because those are gifts from God. And then I would say my final response to those basic things is your call to action. Once you've got this stuff down, now what? Now what? Now you have to act on behalf of family, friends, church, society. That's the common calling of all of us in our baptisms, to act for justice for the world, for common good. That's where I'm coming from. So that's where the framework is. Now, what's the problem? Why are we even talking about gender in the Lutheran Church? Because there is harm being done, or has definitely been done, and I would say it's ongoing. And you know it's true in the society too. But I'm going to start with the church, because that's where we are, and that's how we're trying to wrestle today. This document that came out in 2019 says exactly this. Those who identify as women and girls suffer a range of harm and injustice due to sex, biological, gender, or both. And this harm is complicated by intersecting factors, including race, ethnicity, national origin, nationality, including American Indian and Alaska Native, religious identity, immigration status, sexuality, marital status, economic means, age, ability, embodied experience, and education. In other words, there is harm being perpetrated on women, but if you're a woman of color, there's extra. If you're an immigrant who's a woman of color, who's a woman, there's extra, on and on and on. It can be more complicated. But the fact that we admit as a church that harm is being done to women and people who identify as women, for the purpose of this thing, I will say anyone who identifies as a woman is covered under the branch of women. But that's not how the world works. We're not aware of these harms. We're not necessarily aware of perpetrating them ourselves. But we live in a world that is patriarchal and sexist. And those two words are used a lot. So let me just define how I'm coming at that. A patriarchal system is a social system that is dominated by men. It's identified with men, and it's centered on men's actions and voices and authority. A patriarchal system. And a patriarchal system usually views women as less significant than men. And generally men are given more power and have more authority than women in that worldview. And that's what we call male privilege. You just come from a place where you're automatically given more. Not the same as sexism, but related, because sexism is reinforcing that male privilege. So the patriarchy is the privilege you're given. Sexism is on top of that. And it is the acts of discrimination. So things like silencing or controlling or devaluing women and women's voices. Especially true when your gender expression is different from the norm of how women or men are expressed in the world. So I would say the hardship is exponentially higher for people who are trans or who present not typically masculine or not typically feminine. And I'm not even kidding about the harm. I looked up some crime statistics, but none of them are very current. But trans people are much more likely to suffer violence. The death rate among trans people is exorbitant, particularly trans women. We as a church can't turn our eye to that. We have to pay attention to that. These are people who are dying because of who they are. And nothing about that is abundant. Not for us and not for them. So I just wanted to note also that sexism and patriarchy don't just harm women, although they do. They also harm men. And people who are gay and transgender are specifically harmed by sexism and patriarchy, because you can imagine men are pressured into presenting a specific gender stereotype. So if you don't come across as particularly macho and you don't exhibit all these, you don't give an impression of superiority or control, you can sometimes be ridiculed or diminished because you present differently. Think about the stay-at-home dads that you know and how much jerking they get because that's not a typical male role. Do you know what I mean? I mean, that's just one example, but there is sexism that hurts men as well. And I would say it's extra problematic for people who are men and boys of color because they don't have the white privilege. So sometimes they're not considered really men or boys because they don't have the privilege which goes with masculinity. Sorry if this is all really redundant and you know all of this, but I just want to raise the specter of the harm if we don't pay attention. Probably not accidentally, a lot of the harm that is done is connected to things that we learn in church or in our families. Customs and habits and beliefs often underscore what a joke that you heard in the playground, you may also hear repeated at a family table. Just guessing. The idea of a hierarchy of sex was certainly enforced in my home. My father was the head of the household and we all used that language. And he was the pastor in a Missouri Synod church, and therefore his voice counted on matters of God more than anybody else's in the room. And my mother was his helper. And that was understood that that's how the world worked. This is definitely not something that came easy. I want to read just, I could read read the whole social statement on faith, sexism, and justice to you, because it's a really good document. You can download it from the ELC website, and I highly recommend it. But this feels to me like the nub of what I want us to ponder. So I'm just gonna read this paragraph. I could have picked any, but this is the one that landed for me. For a woman of color, sexism in the workplace is compounded by the discriminatory effects of racism. If someone is also transgender, data shows staggering levels of discrimination and violence. Intersectionality helps explain why some women and girls benefit more than others within a society that operates with intersectional patterns of dominance and submission. Therefore, references to girls and women in this document mean that all people who identify as women and girls. A word such as women often fails to convey its full meaning because our minds tend to default either to our own experiences and identities or to what culture validates as normative, desired, or the dominant meaning. In the United States, the word woman is typically associated with being white, young, and heterosexual unless otherwise specified. The life stories, challenges, hopes, and gifts of women of color, lesbian and other queer women, transgender women, women with disabilities, immigrant women, for example, have often been ignored and sometimes maligned. By using women and girls to refer to us in all our diversity, this church seeks to shift our thinking from limitation or discrimination to inclusiveness. I like that paragraph, particularly because I will tell you that this document in 2019 is the first time that trans and non-straight are specifically named as a group that we are paying attention to. There was a footnote in the 2009 sexuality document. I looked it up. I was like, footnote number 34 mentions, oh, by the way, there might be some trans people. But it wasn't in a document from this church until 2019. This attention to people who might perceive themselves as women who we might not perceive as women. That is way too recent for my conversion. I mean, I was already, had been a pastor for 18 years when that came out. That is spooky to me. And I think it just calls us to the urgency of the matter. We have to think of people who don't look like white, straight, heterosexual women, who are young and beautiful and present as feminine. We have to think about them. They are a part of our call. And there were some calls to action at the end of this statement. Conveniently, in this call to justice, they made some calls specifically to the church and some to society at large. So let me read you the church ones first, because this is what they say. This church's commitment to neighbor justice compels us to expose how patriarchy and sexism are woven into individual, social, and religious life, causing harm to all people, and even all of creation. This church teaches that the God who justifies expects all people to seek justice in their earthly relationships, structures, and systems. The ELCA calls for sustained and renewed efforts through which women, girls, and gender non-conforming people experience greater equity and justice. The following commitments express this church's firm hope for renewed social relationships and structures that benefit the common good. So here's some calls to the church, specifically to read the Bible contextually and reject the misuse of scripture. Very much what Lisa just did for us with the story of the Samaritan woman. We're called to that. Secondly, to be honest about how church teachings have been misused to support patriarchy and sexism. And a specific call to teachers and theologians to work toward worthier expressions of how our faith allows people to thrive. So that's a call to those of you who ever teach Sunday school or teach your grandchildren or whatever. Third, a call to use inclusive language, all genders for human people, and to use expansive language for God, other than human. I mean, we limit ourselves when we think God is male, female, male specifically, but Jesus was not that reduced. Jesus says, how often I've longed to gather you like a mother hen gathers her chicks. Well, nobody that I know has a stained glass picture of Jesus as a mother hen, except one church in Jerusalem. So I made one for my office, but the point is, Jesus also said, I am the gate. Okay, no one is fighting about that in Congress. But these are things that are in the Bible and we have to explore them. What does it mean that Jesus is like a gate? What does it mean that Jesus is like a hen? Open the book and make God bigger. I mean, not make, God is already bigger, but don't reduce. So that's part of our call as a church, is to, in hymns, in prayers, in educational materials, open, expanded images of God. God is bigger than us. And then there's a call specifically for more policies and practices with the ELCA that support and promote leadership and authority of women. And with special concern for women of color. I am gratified that there are more women bishops now than I have ever seen in my life. But that was not an accident. That took a lot of groundwork and concentrated, intentional researching for women who were willing and able to do it, and support by congregational people who voted for them at synod assemblies. So, just saying, that was part of this call to us in 2019, and we seem to be figuring out a little bit about that. But we should also pay attention to the fact that we are called to give more room to men. I mean, things that are not valued as men's work, that are often dismissed as women's work, why can't a man be the chair of the ELCA Guild, for example? Just a little thing. But making room, developing more expansive and inclusive policies and practices. I was delighted to see that there's an encouragement that we provide equitable pay and benefits to women in the ELCA in all of its organizations and congregations, with special attention to people affected by intersecting forms of discrimination. So, for example, women of color. So we're called to pay attention to that. So if you're gonna call a woman pastor, pay attention to how much she's getting paid versus how much men will be getting paid. Just saying. And then finally, the last call of the church is to engage in faithful dialogue, discernment, and when possible, joint action on issues of patriarchy and sexism with other members of the body of Christ. That's ecumenical work, that's interfaith work. People who are trying really hard to be faithful, we're called to work with them and not against, or not let them do the work, in other words. So that's the church call. A few comments about things for society, and I'm going to stop very quickly. Most of them are things that you can read social messages or social statements about. The ELCA has a plethora of these things. If there is an area that interests you, there's probably a social statement about it. My favorite ones are the ones that are most controversial. There's a good one about human rights. Highly recommend. But anyway, so here's some things that we're called to do as part of society. Obvious things, laws, policies, and practices that respect diverse bodies. Let's do that. The eradication of gender-based violence within church and society by addressing systemic aspects of violence and personal responsibility. We're in a system, whether we like it or not. And sometimes you may desperately resist the system, but you're in it, can't get out. So we're called to look at those things and try our best to, within the church and within your settings where you are when you're not in church, to address issues of violence and personal responsibility for people who perpetrate harm. Medical research, call for fair health services, equal opportunity to have health, especially health practices that honor how bodies are different and eliminate discrimination due to sex, gender, or sexual orientation. There's a good social statement on health, and also one on abortion that's more balanced than you think it would be. A call to pay attention to economic policies, regulations, and practices that enhance equity and equality for women and girls, with special concern for raising up women and girls who experience intersectional forms of oppression. Basically, making sure that people of color, people who are trans, people who are disabled, people who have lots of different layers of things, are there regulations and practices that take care of them? And how can we make that happen? For example, I don't know if you know people at Zion Lutheran Church, but they are making sure that there's a ramp to their pulpit area. Up to this point, if you were not able-bodied, you couldn't preach from that pulpit. There's only stairs. Does that seem like a life-changing thing? It can be for some people. So just those kind of things, when you put your brain to who's being disadvantaged by the way the system works right now. Stairs can be a problem, just saying. And finally, the last one that I want to bring up, multifaceted understandings of social and economic roles that were not defined, like saying men are brave and women are compassionate. Why can't a man be compassionate? Why can't a woman be brave? So not confining those things to a particular gender trait. Empowering all people to be who they are. There are a few others, but I think you can get it. I think where I want to end is where I began. Jesus wants us to have life and have it abundantly. And that's not just you and me and the people we love, but all people. And we're called to pay attention to where that's not happening. And when we see that it's not happening, to use our voices and our votes and our activities and our social power, whatever that is, to make sure that we are providing justice for our neighbor. And I believe that's what the ELCA says about gender, or at least today, that's what I believe. Talk to me in a week. I'm going to keep researching because I really enjoyed this. But that's where I am right now, and would love to hear your thoughts. I'm going to stop talking.
What did you brought a video session people?
Yeah, I brought a video. It's not new. It's from 2025, but it was put out by the former presiding bishop, Bishop Eaton, on the Transgender Day of Visibility, and it's a really good little message. It's like 3 minutes. Do you mind playing that? It's really good.
This year we said.
What's it?
I said this year we said nothing.
Imagine that.
Right.
We got work to do. We got work to do. Oh, well, trust me on this, it's good.
I'm not sure what's that word you already put up on YouTube.
I don't know. I'm your least techy person in the world.
YouTube? No. I know.
No, that can't be true.
Yeah, it is true. Sorry about that, guys.
Well, that's also probably true. My meeting is over.
Yeah.
Well, let me see if there are other questions while you're working on that.
Sorry about that.
Oh, no, it's my fault. I'm sure I sent you something that didn't work. Technology's not my gift. Common good, other people are good at this. What do you want to ask about / tell about? Anything new, surprising, upsetting? No.
So you,
Turn on.
you mentioned, danger to transgender people. I just want to point out the average life expectancy of a transgender woman is 35 years.
35 years is the average age of a average life expectancy of a trans woman. If that's not hair raising, I don't know what is. I mean, we have a call here. This is terrifying. What else do we want to talk about? Or want to say more about that? Anything?
Can you say something about Living Mosaic?
We're thrilled to talk about Living Mosaic. Thank you for asking. Many of you are very confused by this. Let me give you a little story of history. Once upon a time in the Montrose, there was a church called Grace Lutheran Church, which you may have heard of. Grace Lutheran Church had a ministry to homeless teens in the area called Grace Place. I think maybe you've served meals there.
Your church.
Oh, let Bishop talk.
I'm deeply troubled by the escalating dehumanization of our transgender and non-binary siblings. This year alone, more than 525 bills have been introduced in Congress and state legislatures across our nation to undermine the dignity and human rights of the LGBTQIA+ community. More than 10 times the number of bills we saw just 5 years ago. This surge in legislative attacks is unprecedented. 2 years ago, during Transgender Day of Visibility, I said that our church holds diverse convictions regarding gender identity.
That diversity has not changed, but neither has our unity in the belief that every person is created in God's image and deserves honor and respect. We are a church committed to defending human and civil rights. In Matthew 22:39, Jesus says, "Love your neighbor as yourself," a directive that leaves no room for exclusion. Christ calls us beyond our comfort to embrace everyone, especially people who are marginalized. Our social statement on faith, sexism, and justice explicitly states that gender justice is a form of neighbor love for everyone to ensure that people do not experience discrimination or oppression based on sex, gender, or sexuality. Our social and biblical teachings describe a world where people deserve to be respected and loved regardless of their identities or expressions. The church has repeatedly committed itself to advocating for and supporting laws, policies, and practices that honor the dignity of diverse bodies rather than discriminating against or dehumanizing them. In other words, human rights do not stop with those who are like us. They must include all our neighbors. The current wave of legislation and the flood of executive orders demonize transgender and non-binary people. Such actions contradict Christ's teaching, do to others as you would have them do to you. I also want to take a moment to speak directly to you, our transgender and non-binary siblings in Christ. During a time when elected leaders wish to erase your existence, when you may be anxious or worried about how people will treat you the moment you step out into the world, when you don't know if the government will take away even more of your rights or medical care, this church continues to advocate for you as your authentic self. God created you in God's image and loves and cares for you exactly as you are. I will continue to lead a church that speaks out, stands up, and advocates for your right to live authentically, to be seen in this world, and to enjoy the same human rights so many others have taken for granted. You deserve to be safe in our communities. Bullying and discrimination have no place in the body of Christ. Because we are all baptized into Christ, we must all work against these injustices, regardless of our identities. Let us affirm our humanity collectively and individually, advocating for the rights and dignity of everyone. Guided by God's love and compassion, may we work tirelessly for justice and equality. Familiarize yourself with our resources regarding LGBTQIA+ issues and how we can support each other, especially those struggling to be seen for who they are and how all of us are created as beautiful children of God. Be well, dear church.
Isn't that good? She's good.
Great job.
I guess not.
He had nothing this year, not even acknowledging the month. Not one word. Not one word.
Not one word from the National Church on Transgender Day of Remembrance.
Word on this month. No word. Zero.
We are all to continue to fight, my friends. Because if the leaders don't do it, we have to. Anything else you want to share?
Yeah, I do. You're right that the first statement accepted by the ELCA was in 2019, but there was a previous document way before your term. In 1993 or 4, the ELCA worked really hard on matters of gender and sexuality, really hard. And the process was that they draft a statement, it goes through a number of revisions, and then it goes to the Conference of Bishops. In 1993 or 94, I can't remember exactly which one. I remember I was sitting in an emergency room in a hospital because my oldest son had really done a number of breaking his arm playing basketball. And I was sitting in this emergency room, waiting room, and the TV was on, and it was ABC News announcing to the world that the ELCA had released a document on gender and sexuality, which was the best ever written by far. And it did not go to the bishops first. It just got inadvertently released. And the explosion would be heard all over the country. The ELCA's churches, bishops, good number of pastors, absolutely went nuts. First of all, because of a national news. It never got anywhere at all. And it took from 1993 or 1994 to the statement in 2016 to get the church to say anything. So when you talk about things changing, we went from one end to the other end. But it took 25 years. 25 years. So, and now we have a leadership in this church that literally said nothing about pride this month, about anything related to any question of sexuality or gender. I think this is what's happened. We've decided that when we start electing a lot of women bishops, and there are more than 10, by the way, as of this weekend, we've done enough. And that's the big danger for the ELCA. Coming to the point where you say, oh, we've done enough. That's the problem for Presbyterian too. We never, the first time you say you've done enough, go to confession. Because that's just not a word we can use as Christians. I gotta go to a baptism.
Okay, good times, good times. Thank you so much.
What did you do to know that?
Thank you so, I did not know
It
anything
was-
about that.
It was, I've never seen anything like it.
Can I find it online? Is it around?
It's 93 or 94. And it's a dandy.
But it won't be on the
I'll bet you gotta look really hard.
Okay, I didn't see it on the ELC
I
website.
can still see
Yeah.
the room, so in the emergency room,
Yeah.
there are all these other people besides the one guy at Clare. And when they saw this news, everybody in the room was, no, they didn't turn to me, they thought I was a Catholic priest. So they went crazy. How could a church do this? These were not one of them was a Lutheran. And I said, I will tell you. I said, absolutely nothing. So,
Lisa,
We have a few minutes left, you start to tell us about maybe.
right, so Grace Place was a ministry that served mostly homeless teens. As time evolved, Grace Place became its own separate 501c3. So people talk about Grace Place, it still exists, although Grace does not. Grace Place continues to serve homeless teens, and they are well staffed, and they are in what used to be Sunday school rooms on the second floor of the building. When Grace ceased to exist, there was a church called Kindred, which was a dinner church. And Kindred existed until this summer. And when they were looking for a pastor, they interviewed me, and a couple of times actually. And the first time I said, I'm not interested in dinner church. I don't feel called to this ministry. I'm so sorry. You're lovely people. This is it. And then we re-engaged in conversation. They said, we have decided we're open to other things. At that time, I had been called by the Synod to be a mission developer, and I was working with a group of formerly incarcerated women. And I believed that my process was to help found some place for them to live. But that was like dead end after dead end after dead end. I was losing spirit. And had a really good chat with a spiritual director who said, maybe this is the Holy Spirit blocking that path. Maybe you're being called to something else. And I did not like that at all. However, I was listening. At the same time, because Kim Falk was going through the process of becoming a deacon, and there was no pastor at Kindred, the Synod office asked me if I would be his internship supervisor. So I met with Kenan at Kindred every week. And our visions and dreams about what church could be and do in Montrose started to match, or at least rhyme. And so when I interviewed with them the second time, they said, we're willing to explore some of the things that you're caring about, which primarily were looking at art as a way of deepening our faith. And they said, yeah, we're all about that. And I said, can we do like traditional liturgy? And they're like, we're all about that as long as it's beautiful. So we are very focused on beauty at Living Mosaic. And about, Lisa and I are not sure about the numbers, but maybe 75% of our congregation is LGBTQ. And we're in the mantras. We know our call. Our call is to reach out to people who have been burned by church because of their sexuality for the most part. We worship on Sunday evenings at 5:30, and at 4:30 we have an adult ed time called Deconstructing Christianity, where we take what we learned that was damaging and try to unpack it and look at what it did and what do we believe now? What are some other ways of thinking about this? We, for example, looked at the creeds on Trinity Sunday and talked about what is not in this creed that you want to profess is what you believe about God. Those kinds of things. So we're doing that, we're doing a lot of art, and we're engaging a group called LEAD. Some of you are familiar with them. They are consultants to churches to help us develop an outreach strategy to our gay neighbors or our LGBTQ neighbors. Lisa and I are particularly committed to making this a safe place for trans people, because there aren't a lot. One of the things that is presently operating, because of the guidance of Kenan Fall, who's our deacon, who is an accomplished chef and a great visionary, we're looking at maybe creating a cafe that would be in our worship space on Monday through Friday for lunch. One of the things we've heard loud and clear from people is that if you're sober and you're queer, there are not a lot of places for you to socialize because bars are the place. And if you don't want to go to a bar to meet other people, you got nothing. So there's a coffee shop across the street from us, so we're not offering coffee. We thought we would go with a tea theme. And so I think that's happening. In addition, Kieran is taking the ministry and making it even more rich by promoting a group called Kinder Kitchen. He still has a little truck that will come and serve tacos or whatever you want at a meal, a little food truck. But he's taking on students, mostly connected through Grace Place, people who have really limited experiences and opportunities. Not all homeless, not all trans, but often, and teaching them kitchen skills. And so that they're employable, and they will be the kitchen staff for our new tea shop. And they'll be the service staff as well, and then the space can easily be converted back into a worship space on the weekends and an event space if somebody wants to have. We're looking for a poetry slam, if somebody wants to do that, talk to me. And some other event kinds of things that would be social things that don't involve a bar. So that's where we are right now. Lots of things are happening, and you're all invited to come to our first annual, I hope, Pride Film Festival. We're showing 2 movies, and the money that we're not charging anything to attend this. I'm grateful to say that we got a gracious donation from Zion. And so we are able to show these movies without charging for them. We will have concessions and those we will definitely sell. But the idea is that these are films that would be maybe not readily available at a theater. So the first one, which we're showing next week, is called Come See Me in the Midlight. It's about a poet who was the poet laureate of Colorado who gets ovarian cancer and is dying. And for the last, I want to say year, but it may be longer, the last period of their life, they invited a documentary filmmaker to observe their relationship and their experiences. A lot of it is about the relationship with their wife. So there's a beautiful love story. It's not as tragic as it sounds, although it is definitely a Kleenex, bring several Kleenexes. It's a weeper. And then we'll skip the week of the 21st, but then the 28th, we're showing a movie called Sabbath Queen, which is about an Orthodox Jewish man who grew up in Israel, a long line of rabbis. I think he was like the 8th generation. Oldest son was supposed to be a rabbi, but discovered he was gay and moved to New York and was like leaving all that religious stuff behind me, but couldn't. You know how that works, some of you probably. Wanted to leave behind the faith and it just wouldn't let you go. But by that point was, he describes himself as a transvestite. He did a lot of cross-dressing and a lot of drag. And so I just started to be a rabbi in drag. And that's what Saturday is about. I'm delighted to say we have some rabbi who's coming to Toledo after the film conversation on that day. So we'll get the Jewish perspective and you can ask all your questions that I don't have answers for. And now you're itching for me to go home. Okay.
We're not.
We're not itching.
No itching, good.
Thank you, Sue. On behalf of our group, we thank you all for attending and especially special thanks to Pastor Sue Schneider.
Truly my pleasure. Truly. I'll come again anytime.
And I just want to emphasize to you that our creative inclusion team meets monthly to help bring education and awareness to Christ the King. And if you have any questions or any particular topics that you would like to see us cover, one thing we realized is that we probably as a team need to write a letter to the bishop's office, expressing our disappointment in the fact that the national offices didn't recognize anything this year so far. So if you have something that comes up, please get in touch with one of us, Gretchen, put your hand up, yellow, and Gretchen, Camilla, Lisa, me, and Frederick Rose, our council representative, and then Maureen. Thank you so much for being a part of our presentation this morning.
Thank you.
So much. It was a pleasure. You just ordered your
Yeah, it's not gonna go this.
very good.
I. That's not too.